Hello and welcome to the DDtrac online training webinar. My name is Dawn Gregg and I'm going to be doing the webinar and conducting the training today. I am the original developer of DDtrac. I also happen to be the Associate Professor of Information Systems at the University of Colorado, Denver, and the parent of a child with autism. DDtrac was originally designed primarily as a data collection and analysis tool to allow you to take data for individual special education students and then be able to track the progress they are making towards their goals and objectives so that you can make meaningful changes to their educational programs. More recently, it's evolved to add a lot of additional features to allow you to do things like generate IEPs, to take attendance data, to have a student record for the students that you serve, and in that way it enables small special education schools to have a complete student information system that they can use within their organization. So today I'm going to talk briefly about the major areas that people spend the most time in DDtrac. So I'm going to start by talking about data entry, more specifically individual data entry, and then I'm going to talk about setting up goals and objectives, and then finally I'm going to talk about some of the reports and charts that you can generate with DDtrac. So to take data with DDtrac, all you really need is any type of computing device that allows you to connect to the internet. So it can be a PC, a laptop, a tablet, or any handheld smartphone device that has a browser. Once you log into DDtrac, you'll see a screen like the one right here, and it's going to highlight the students that you're authorized to work with, the groups or courses you're allowed to take data for or actually read their data for. And a group or course could be a special education class, it could be a regular ed class, it could be a speech therapy group, it could be a pull-out reading tutoring group. Anytime you have a group of 2 or more students that you do specialized instruction with. Finally, at the bottom there's an area called offline data entry, and that contains links to a long offline data entry form that you can use to enter data if you don't have a consistent connection to the internet, and also to our mobile offline data entry pages, which are essentially web pages designed to allow you to take data in DDtrac that are optimized for a handheld device, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So once you're on this screen, you would want to click the name, let's say, of a student you intend to work with. And once you do that, then you're going to be taken to a page that allows you to take a variety of different kinds of data for that student. I'm not going to talk about each of these types of data in depth, so I want to mention them briefly now. The first type of data that you can take is instructional data, and that's for data that you might be taking related to any academic goal or even therapy type goals that that you're actively instructing a student how to perform on. So it could be a physical therapy goal or an occupational therapy goal. Social data is data that's being taken usually based on teacher observation of student socialization, and it would be useful if your student isn't doing like an RDI, relationship developmental intervention, or other social development kind of program. Another common type of data that we take is behavior data, and that's data that you take to help you understand students' behavior episodes more fully. The other 4 types of data that we have is observation data, which are really just narrative comments that you use to describe either the student's mood or their behavior during a specific daily exercise. These comments might be ones that you would do in the student's folder or in their back and forth book to send to parents. Milestone data is any education, intervention, or medication or other change in the student's life that might have a potential to impact their learning. So if you implemented a new behavior plan, you could set up a milestone for them, and then that milestone could be plotted on a chart so that you could see the impact that that milestone had on their subsequent behavior patterns. There's also something called standard assessment data, and if you're giving standardized assessments to your students, whether it's like the ABLES exam for autism, some other, like transition tests or some other standardized tests that are like mandated by your state, you can set up those tests as standard assessments and then take the same type of data for a large population of students. And if you give the assessment more than once, you can actually see how the student's performance on that assessment changes over time. The final type of data you can take for an individual student is attendance data, and that data can be used to track whether they're present, absent, or tardy for a particular class, or you can use that kind of data to track the number of hours of a particular intervention they may receive. Like they had 1 hour of speech therapy starting at 2:30 and ending at 3:30 on Tuesday, and 2 hours of occupational therapy starting at 8 a.m. and ending at 10 a.m. on Friday. So the most common type of data that people spend the majority of their time taking is instructional data. To take instructional data, you will select the student on the home page, as I mentioned, and then go to the Data Entry tab and select Instructional Data. Once you do that, you'll see a page that looks kind of like this little page here on the left, and it's got the list of the goals. And grouped under each goal are the objectives that they have. So expressive language has 3 objectives. Self-management has 4 objectives. If I were then to click on the picture sequencing link, a data entry page would open for me, and I would then be able to take data for that picture sequencing objective. This particular picture sequencing objective has 4 targets, and those are more specific instructional targets that we are actually taking data on. The number of targets you define for a particular student will depend entirely upon the student and the objective you're teaching. So in this case, this particular objective has 4 targets. Occasionally you'll have an objective with only 1 target, and at other times you may have an objective with 50 to 100 targets. Again, it depends on the student and the student's needs. For example, for my son, if we were teaching him spelling or to say a word, we would want to track his performance on each individual word. Whereas for another student, you might want to see how well he said words starting with CH, and so you might say CH words and TH words, and so use a whole class of words as your target. And so again, it just really depends on the individual needs of the student and the level of granularity that you need the data be taken for. And there's a number of things I want to point out on the data collection screen. First off, it gives you the date, the last time that this particular objective was worked on, and the student's mood and overall demeanor the last time that you took data. The individual targets are actually grouped on the page. The first 3 targets are what we call unmastered targets, and that's the targets that the student is struggling with and currently has not met the mastery criteria that the teacher has set up when they defined the objective for this particular that associated with these targets. The target dressing is a master target, and that the student has gotten 100% correct measured over the past 5 work sessions. So that apparently meets the student's mastery criteria, and so since the student has mastered this criteria, this particular target has been sorted to the bottom of the screen, and the person now taking data knows that they don't have to practice that particular target as often as the other 3 targets at the top of the screen. Mastery, I just wanted to point out, is something that DDtrac calculates for you automatically. Every time you open a particular objective, it looks and it recomputes mastery so that you always know exactly which targets are mastered and what the past performance on that particular target has been over the past few work sessions that you have worked with the student. So you can see for these targets, setting the table is by far and away the worst target because that student has gotten 0% correct measured over the last 5 work sessions. There's a couple other things I want to tell you about instructional data collection. One of the things is that you can set up the number of trials you want to take data for when you design the objective. So in the first example, we're only taking what we call correct, incorrect data, which means you can only say whether the student responded correct or incorrectly, and we only have 1 trial. So we're only going to take data 1 time on each each of the targets. Actually, you don't have to take data on all the targets. In this case, we skipped movie. But on the targets that we do take data on, we're only going to take it one time. If you're working with a student with autism, frequently when you're doing ABA trial data, you'll do 5 to 10 trials of a particular target during a given work session. And that's something you set up when you define the objective, how many trials you want to do. This particular data collection screen shows me ABA trial data with 5 trials. So I could take 5 pieces of data for block and 5 pieces of data for horse during this data collection session. I do want to point out that you do not have to take all of the data. You could still just take one piece of data during the data collection session, but you at least have the option. You have 5 places to take data when you're taking data for this particular objective. The second type of data collection that I wanted to discuss is behavior data. Really behavior data is driven by 2 factors. It's really it surrounds the need for you to track the behavior episodes and determine if whatever efforts you are taking to minimize behavior problems are effective. And secondly, quite often schools are required to document behavior episodes for accountability purposes. And really the behavior data collection in DDtrac is designed to address both of those needs. We really have 2 different levels of behavior data collection. When you open the behavior data collection form, at the top of the form you're going to see this small set of fields. These are the fields that you really need to fill out every time you're recording a behavior in DDtrac. The form has a start date and start time for the behavior episode, and this is automatically filled in by DDtrac when you open the form and will be the current time and date. However, you can then edit those if you're taking the data for a past behavior episode, one that occurred an hour ago or yesterday. Then you're going to want to record the trigger, which is really the antecedent that you believe preceded the occurrence of and triggered the occurrence of the behavior episode. You also then will record the location. In this case, we've recorded that the behavior occurred in the therapy room, but you can list any possible locations and set those up for your site. So you can have playground and classroom and therapy room and hallway and library, and again those locations are set up for a particular site, and so you can actually add any particular locations you want when you're defining your site definition. Once you've picked those things, you can add 1 or more behaviors to the behavior data collection form. This is the second phase of this form. Initially, when the form loaded, it said, how many behaviors do you want to record? And I said 2. You could say 1, you could say 5, and so then you'll have the correct number of blanks to allow you to enter the behaviors that the student exhibited. So in this case, the student had headbutting. It lasted about 2 minutes, and they only headbutted 1 time. They also have had a behavior of kicking, and it lasted 3 minutes, and again there were 3 kicks during that 3-minute period. So you record the duration and the number, because you can then later chart behaviors either by duration or by number of behaviors exhibited during the episode. Below this particular information on the behavior data collection form, you can also specify additional data. The additional data you can specify are things like the intervention. So in this case, the student was redirected to replacement behavior for about 2 minutes, and then they did a physical escort or restraint for 2 minutes. So there were 2 different interventions that they took in order to address this particular behavior episode. You can also specify if there was anybody else involved, whether it be staff, the teacher, a substitute, a parent, or peers. And then you can also specify if there were any consequences. Some students don't receive consequences, other students might receive loss of privileges, or they might have to make restitution, all the way up to expulsion. You can also check off any areas on this little body if there was any injuries resulting from the behavior episode. The child headbutted, so if you could potentially check, this little forehead thing because they got a bruise on their forehead as a result of the headbutting episode. You can specify in more detail the other parts of the face that might have been injured during the behavior episode. And then following those drop-down lists, which are designed really to make it very quick to enter the data for the behavior episode, you then can enter comments about the behavior episode, either how it started, alternatives you might have wanted to take to deal with the behavior episode, and how the episode ended. And if you fill in these extra comments, these kinds of things will show up when you do a functional behavior analysis to help you perform a better functional behavior analysis by understanding the situation surrounding a particular behavior on the multiple different occasions when it might have occurred. We also have something called a quiet room record, and the quiet room record is something that you can show on your behavior form but does not show by default. So you'd have to click a link to make it show up. And the quiet room record is really designed to allow you to track any time the student spent in the quiet room if you use a quiet room or a timeout room with your student. And so you can specify the time when you're making the observation of the quiet room, what behavior the student was exhibiting while they were in the quiet room, the staff that entered that data, and whether or not the quiet room was locked. You can take all types of individual data using the mobile data entry option. In order to take mobile data entry data, you have two ways to really get to the mobile data entry form. On the main DDtrac login page, there's actually this little DDtrac mobile icon in the upper left-hand corner. And if you click that icon, it will take you to a page that is optimized to allow you to log in on a mobile device. If you go ahead and log in on our regular login page, then on the home page, there's a link called Mobile Offline Data. And if you click that link, then you'll be taken to a page that allows you to select the students that you want to work with during this mobile data entry session. Once you select the students and click Submit, what the DDtrac is going to do is it's going to download all of the forms and the relevant data for those students that you've selected and generate all of the mobile data entry pages for you to be able to take data with. Then you will see a list of the students that you're allowed to work with, and you can click the link to the individual student you're going to be taking data for. When you do that, it'll then show you a list of the types of data that you can collect, just like with most of the data collection you do for on the regular device. You can take instructional data, behavior data, social data, you can enter narrative observations, and you can actually view the last 5 or so past narrative comments entered by other therapists working with the student. So if you've forgotten maybe what happened yesterday, you could look back at those past observations, even if you were not in your classroom and nowhere near someplace that had an internet connection. Assuming you're going to click instructional data, you would then see the same list of goals and objectives that you would see on the main DDtrac instructional objective page. So in this case, I'm going to check that I want to go see and take data on Go Do PECs. And when I click that link, it's going to take me to the data entry page, which shows me all of the targets that I can take data for. In this case, I'm going to take data for laundry. So when I click laundry, it's going to show me a drop-down list because to take data for the laundry objective. Now I'm seeing a drop-down list because I specified that this particular objective, I'm not going to take correct incorrect data, I'm not going to take ABA trial data, I'm going to take prompt level data, which is essentially the level of prompting that I had to do to get the student to achieve this task. So I can then take data on any or all of the targets associated with this objective, and then I can save this data. And what that does is that saves it locally to your device, but it doesn't save it back to DDtrac. You actually, each of the pages that was cut off so you could see this more clearly, each of the data collection pages within DDtrac actually has within the mobile part of DDtrac actually has a login box at the bottom of the page. And when you have taken all the data that you intend to take, all you need to do is enter your username and password at the bottom of the page and hit submit, and the data you have taken will now be uploaded back to DDtrac and stored in the database so everybody else can have access to it. One other thing that I wish to point out about the mobile data collection is it is a browser-based application. So even though the interface looks like something that's iPhone specific, it actually will run in any browser, so that the form will look very similar on a Droid-based handheld device, or on an iPhone device, or on a Palm device, or any other device that you might have that has a browser on it. The only thing that will really change is the way this drop-down list appears will differ depending on the type of device that you wind up using, because each device has its own way of showing things like drop-down lists, radio buttons, and checkboxes. The last type of data entry that I want to discuss is group data. A group data is really designed to optimize and minimize the amount of time you have to spend collecting data, especially if you're taking data for, let's say, a small group of students. So if I was a speech therapist, for example, I might have a speech therapy goal that I work on with a group of 3 students. If I specified all of those as individual goals and objectives in DDtrac, when I take the data, I'd have to go and select each student in turn, take the data for the student, come back, and then select another student to be able to take the data. If I set it up as a group objective, then I would be able to go in and take progress monitoring probe data for each of the students in my group. And when I went into that data collection form, I would see all 3 of the students listed and be able to take data for all 3 of those students on the same page. In order to be able to take data in DDtrac, the first thing you really need to do once you have your students and users defined is to set up the goals and objectives. Those goals and objectives really control how all that data entry that I was just showing you appears when you go to take data. DDtrac allows 3 different types of individual goals and objectives to be defined: instructional goals, social goals, and behavior goals. And you can also define instructional goals for a group of students as well. When you're defining instructional goals for an individual student, you define instructional goals. Actually, they have 3 major parts. You have the goal, which is your long-term goal that you might work on over the course of a whole year, or maybe even more than a year. You also then have your shorter term instructional objectives, and these are the things that are designed to be measurable intermediate steps between what your current level of functioning is and that longer term goals. And so really you're taking data for instructional objectives. However, you're really taking data on individual targets, and the individual target is the individual instruction that you're giving to the student and they're responding to, and that you take data on. So I might have a long-term goal of improving expressive language, and I might have an objective of word articulation, but my target then would be either the individual words that I'm trying to get the student to say, or groups of words that may have a common vowel word pattern. So, a speech therapist might work with somebody that has trouble saying words with the sound SH, and so their target might be SH words or CH words, and take data on that. And again, the number of targets you define and how specific the targets are is entirely dependent on the student you're working with and the type of goal and objective that you are defining. In order to take data on an instructional goal, you're going to select a student from the main menu, on the home page, and then you're going to see a set of tabs that look like the tabs at the top of this page. If I selected an individual student, then when I click the goals tab, that goals tab would be the goals for that individual student. Once I click the goals tab and I choose to set up an instructional goal, I'm going to see something that looks like this, which is our goal definition wizard. And you have actually 4 different ways you can create an instructional goal. You can use our goal wizard, and I'm going to show you, which will actually step you through the process of creating a goal. You can use goal edit view, which is just a form you can fill out with all the goal information that you have. You can import a goal from our database of nearly 10,000 goals and objectives. Then those are organized by subject area and grade level. And finally, you can use a quick edit view, which is a screen that allows you to enter the very minimum amount of information for your goals, objectives, and targets, so that you can actually set up 6 goals, each with 6 objectives, each with 5 targets, very, very quickly, so you can get started taking data rapidly and then come back and add additional detail about the goals and objectives when you have more time. So this particular picture is a picture that's from the goal edit view. So for a long-term goal, you can specify the goal name, its subject or content area, and then just the basic description of the goal. And this would ideally be taken from something like your IEP. For your objective, so if you scroll down on the page, you will see a list of 1 or more objectives. And the objectives are divided to allow you to specify a variety of data. So we have the objective name, and that's the name that's going to show up in the link that you're clicking either on the data entry page or on the mobile data entry page to allow you to know what objective you're taking data for. The description of the objective, if you have specific instructions you want to give when you're teaching the objectives, you can specify that. You can specify the baseline, the student response, or prompts. That data is all optional that you can define to help people know how that objective is to be taught more clearly. You can also need to specify the data collection type. There are a number of different data collection types available in DDtrac. I've already shown you the correct, incorrect. This particular objective is ABA trial, which is really designed for the ABA trial data used in autism programs. There's also a nonverbal prompt. This is our long nonverbal prompt, which actually has 10 different prompt levels that you would then be able to say how much prompting it required for the student to be able to complete the task. The shorter version only includes really 6 different prompt levels. The verbal prompt is designed for use when you're trying to teach language skills to a student, so it's, how do you prompt students to say particular things. We also have a Likert scale. You can either have one with 5 options or 7 options, and the default Likert scales are range between proficient and not yet as the good and the bad ends of the scale. However, we also have another Likert scaled option called the 5 or 7 prompt, and what that is it's a Likert scale very similar to this one, except for it's got either 5 or 7, and it's either goes to no prompt, to full prompt, or no prompt to non-response, depending on which one you choose. And then in your goal definition, under the prompts field, you can then specify what you want each one of those little buttons in the Likert scale to be. So in this case, I had entered this text: no prompt, verbal cue, pointing gesture, tactile cue, and full physical assist into that prompts text box. And now on my data entry page, those prompt definitions will appear at the bottom of my data collection form. The other types of data collection you can do is you can take time on task or time to complete a task, which could be entered in either minutes or seconds, a score or a count number, or you can actually have tally boxes where you check off the number of times you observe a specific thing. So on the data collection form, the data collection forms includes the concept of mastery, And mastery is used really to decide which targets the student is achieving, what the expected level of performance that you have described in your IEP. And so mastery is, and I'll show you where it was defined on this particular data collection form, really is computed using 3 different numbers. The first is the mastery criteria. So on most things, on like an ABA trial, you usually would set up that you're trying to get the student to get the answer correct. For correct, incorrect, that's really the only option. On a prompt, you might specify what level of prompting you expect the student to be able to need in order to be able to get it right. So it could be no prompt, but it could be also something like a point prompt or a gesture prompt, that you expect the student to get it right with. So that's the level correct, how well the student needs to do on that particular trial in order to be able to have it count positively towards mastery for that particular target. You also then have the percent for mastery. So in this case, that means that they've got to get it correct 80% of the time. And then you also have to specify, okay, well, how far am I measuring over? I mean, is it 80% of the time for the last year? Which is, if you did really badly in the beginning, it would take a long time for you to be able to achieve that. Or is it 80% of the time in the last week? In this case, it's actually the number of sessions for mastery. So I say they've got to get it correct 80% of the time measured over the last 5 occasions when I took data on this particular objective. So, if I did it last week, then 2 weeks ago, and then the day before that, and the day before that, and then a week before that, it's just going to go back the last 5 times I took data for this particular target for this objective. Did the student get that 80% correct or not? And so once you've defined your mastery criteria, again, every time you go to take data on a specific objective, DDtrac is going to automatically go in and recompute and check whether or not each target is mastered. And it's going to then display the targets to you so that you know which ones are mastered and which ones are not. So you have a better idea of what you're supposed to work on during any given work sessions. So just to summarize, a target is that specific instructional task that the student is expected to learn, and you are actually taking the data on individual targets. An objective can have 1 or more targets. Initially, when you're setting up an objective, you will see that you can establish 10 targets on the data collection form. If you want to set up more targets, what you can do is you can just save the objective with the 10 targets you've defined, and then you can go click the objective definition again, and additional blank target spaces will show up so you can define additional objectives for that additional targets for that particular objective. I already mentioned that you can import goals from our database of sample goals. The other kind of objectives and things that I wish to talk about you setting up today is really behavior goals. Many of our schools use DDtrac heavily for behavior data tracking, and there's 2 different things that you establish when you're tracking behavior goals in DDtrac. The first thing is really the behavior goal itself, and the behavior goal has a behavior goal name, a goal, you could set an action plan, and you can actually even attach a file to the behavior goal so that you can upload, let's say, a behavior plan for a particular student and have it available within DDtrac for other people to view. However, really the behavior goals that you set up are not what you take data on in DDtrac. The behavior goals are really used exclusively for information purposes only. What you take, and so technically you can track behaviors for students and never establish a behavior goal or never enter a behavior goal within DDtrac. What you really need to set up when you're setting up behaviors data tracking for a particular student is the behaviors and triggers that you want to track for the student. So when you go to the Goals tab, you'll select the behaviors goals link, and then you'll choose the Behaviors and Triggers tab on the data collection form, and then you'll see a form that looks something like this. It has a list of behaviors that you can track data for at the top, a list of triggers that you can track data for at the bottom. And what you'll do is you can go in and you can check any of the behaviors or triggers that we've got predefined within DDtrac and say, yes, I want to track those for these students. And then if we don't have a particular behavior or trigger embedded in DDtrac that you want to take data for, you can then define your own extra behaviors or triggers that you want to take data on. So if the student does something very specific that you've never seen anybody else do, you can actually define a very specific behavior for that student. So for example, for this student, we actually have something called pinching soft to differentiating from pinching. And that's something that's custom to that particular student because that student happens to like to pinch softly, and it's a precursor to his more violent behaviors. Group goals are really just instructional goals that you're establishing for a group of students. So just like with individual instructional goals, you can actually import a group instructional goal from the database of sample goals and objectives that are built into DDtrac. You can actually import a behavior or a social goal from the database as well, because we do have some of those in the database as well. The group goals setup form is a slightly different. Really, the objective definition is similar, but it doesn't include the concept of mastery. It has the objective name, the objective, the date introduced. The date mastered is not stored here because, of course, the date mastered will vary by student. And then for the objective, you define various progress monitoring probes. So for instance, this is an objective called letter sound relationships, and the probe is something that I'm going to enter a score. On average, I expect the students to get a score of 7, and then you can describe the probe and say whether or not you're currently working on the probe. You can also set up gradebook assignments for a particular group. So that would be if you're going to give written assignments or a quiz to an entire group of students. Unlike the probes, which are designed to be given weekly or on a regular basis, the assignments are something that will generally have a due date, and the students will hand that particular assignment in one time, receive a score. So the last thing I want to talk about today is the reports and charts that come built into DDtrac. Really, you spend an awful lot of time, setting up the programs and taking the data, and you really don't get, as far as I'm concerned, excited about using DDtrac until you can actually use the data to generate reports and charts. Because until then, it's just labor, and you're really not seeing the benefit. The benefit is in using the reports and charts. So there's a variety of different reports and charts you can generate, either for individual students or for groups of students. And the advantage of doing a group report would be that you might be able to get a broad overview of an entire class without going in and generating individual reports for each student. It's just one of those time-saving measures. So I'm going to talk about some of the individual reports in DDtrac, and the individual reports are grouped into a few different categories. The first is individual summary reports, and these are designed to summarize a variety of information for a period of time. It's not specific to instructional or social or behavior. It could include aspects of all of these. So the detail report, I'm going to show you an example of that below, provides detailed data for a single month, week, or day. So you could actually generate a detailed report at the end of each day and send it home with the student. A summary report is actually a large table that will show you their students' performance month by month or week by week. That allows you to see how they performed on each target that they're working on each social objective they're working on, and and the number of behaviors or the duration of behaviors that they have for each of the behaviors you're tracking. So we also have a gradebook report which would allow you to see how students are doing in all their classes. A comment report is just all the comments entered for the student for a period of time. And the milestone report really lists all the milestones that you might have entered for a particular student. So this is example, a really kind of short, squatty example of a detailed report. And it starts out with all of the comments that have been entered for the student for the period covered by the report. So this is the last day of the month. There are probably all of the comments from the first day of the month to the last day of the month above this on the report. I just didn't show them all. Then you would have a list of all of the behaviors that the student had during the month. In this case, the student only had one behavior during this month, and it only lasted 1 minute. It also then would summarize the social goals that they worked on this during the month. In this case, the student didn't work on any social goals during the month. And then you're going to see the goal, the objective, and each target, and you can see how often you worked on that particular goal, what that goal is being measured on. For ABA trial and correct, incorrect, the scale will be % correct. However, for things like the prompt ones or the score ones, you'll see the average prompt level, or you'll see the average score that the student received during the period of time. Below these more summary reports, you're going to have the individual instructional reports. The target report, performance report is really just this target report without the other data alongside it. We also have an unmastered target report and a mastered target report, and that gives you, those are designed to give you more information on how much effort it's taking for a student to master a target. So an example of an unmastered target report is this one. I'm looking at just the expressive label text objective, which is in my expressive language goal, and I can see these are each of the individual targets that the student has not yet mastered. I can see what day that target was introduced, the number of days that we've been working on that target, and obviously the student has not yet mastered it, the number of times we've practiced the particular target, and you can see part of the reason why the student may not have mastered these targets is they haven't been practiced all that often. And then you can see the number of times we practice these particular targets in the past month. So what I can see is that we didn't start really practicing any of these targets heavily until the last month, at least these top few. Then it also will show you the average performance the student has achieved on these targets in the past month. So this is 0.6 or 60%, 50% on some of them. Looks like this one's 75% and this one's 75%, which means that may be that they're getting close to being mastered. There's some reports to show how the students are performing on their social objectives, and then we have a variety of behavior reports. The behavior detail report really will show just a summary of all of the behavior episodes and the data you took for each behavior episode for an extended period of time. So you could generate a behavior report for a month or a year, and then you could see every single thing that you took data on for that entire period. The incident report is really just the design to show you the page that you took the data on for the behavior data. It's a report generated from that page. It's designed to be printed and maybe filed if you have to track details on a particular incident. You can also email that report to parents or other people in the organization, because every report in DDtrac, you can actually email it directly from within DDtrac to people that have permission to access that student's data. The other type of report that you have access to is a functional behavior report. The functional behavior report is really designed to show all of the information surrounding a particular behavior. In this case, I'm looking at hitting, and I can see all of the triggers that people had recorded that generated hitting, the locations where the hitting episodes occurred, the interventions that were taken in response to a hitting episode, the consequences the student was given across all of the different hitting episodes, the other people that were involved when the student hit, and then it gives you a measure of the overall severity of the episode. In this case, every time the student hit, it on average lasted 1 minute or less. It had one behavior per episode, and only across all of the hitting episodes, there was only one injury. This suggests that hitting may not be as serious a behavior because that's really on the severity range is a much smaller severity than if it lasted 10 minutes or they hit 10 or 20 times. Then you will see all of the comments that were entered by people during the period covered by this report. And these comments then you can use to see additional details about behavior episodes that resulted in hitting. And really the purpose of this functional behavior report is really designed to help you more effectively do a functional behavior analysis for the particular student. For a lot of the things that I take data on, I almost prefer to look at the charts as opposed to the reports. For me, I find that looking at the data on charts makes it much easier for me to visualize the data and the student's progress than it is if I'm looking at numbers in a table. We have a variety of different instructional charts that you can generate when working in DDtrac. We have a target performance chart, which is the average student performance on a specific instructional targets for a period of time. The target process percent, which is their actual percent correct, really, that they're achieving for their particular targets for an objective. Mastery chart, which really shows the number of targets the student had mastered by a given date. And for my son, I generally find that the mastery chart is the one that gives me the most information just because of the way he progresses. He's kind of uneven day to day, so a lot of the lines on a lot of the charts for him go up and down a lot. But what you can see is, after we'd been working on something 1 month, he'd mastered 1 target. After we'd been working 5 months, he'd mastered 2 targets. After we'd been working 6 months, he'd mastered 10 targets. So you can see all of a sudden if he is mastering targets at a rate that suggests that he is really learning the particular objective. So the picture I have here is of a target progress percent. It's actually for ABA trial data, and so in this particular objective I defined it so the mastery criteria is set to be prompted correct. So I see my goal line on this chart to be for the prompted correct data. So this is the percentage of the trials that the student essentially got prompted correct or 100% correct without prompt. The lower line, though, also will show me, even though I'm working towards this green, which is prompted correct, the student is beginning to learn how to get this particular thing correct without a prompt. And so this is the percentage of the trials that the student is getting correct without a prompt. We have a variety of social charts that will show you your students' average performance on their social objectives. And then we have a variety of behavior charts that will help you understand students' patterns of behavior better. So for example, this is just a standard behavior chart. Most of the behavior charts, the top 5 behavior charts are the top 4 types of behavior charts are plotted over time. The behavior time chart is plotted by time of day, so you can see what time of day the student is most likely to have a behavior problem. We have the behavior by trigger, by location, and by user, and that will show you essentially how many behaviors you have for each of your different triggers, and it helps to get you a better idea of what triggers are causing behavior problems more often, what locations the student is more prone to have behavior problems at, and perhaps even if the student tends to have more severe behavior problems with particular staff as opposed to other staff. So the way the behavior chart looks, the standard way I set up a behavior chart is I almost always use a stacked columns chart because it shows me, all of the different things that are making up the behavior problem. Plus, I get to see the total overall behavior for each month or period. So in this case, it looks like the student's behavior is on average going down. The first month, I can see that he had self-injury, pinching, multiple times, which is where he's hitting, pinching, kicking, and punching all at the same time. And then hitting is a very small amount. So we had 109 minutes of this type of behavior during the first month that we took data. You can plot behaviors again either by minutes or by the number of behaviors you saw for each particular behavior type. You can see the behaviors decreasing over time. If you plotted a trigger chart, you would actually see the total numbers at the top of each of these bars for duration would be identical, but instead of seeing how they break down by behavior, you'd see how they break down by trigger. And so this legend would have all of the triggers you're tracking as opposed to the behaviors. Similarly for the locations, you see the locations on the right-hand side. You do have the option to generate what we call a multi-behavior chart, and that essentially generates a behavior chart like you see, a trigger chart, a location chart, a behavior time chart, and an intervention chart, so you can see how many interventions you took during that period with one selection. So you select that, and then it generates all of the 4 charts at once. It takes a little bit longer to generate the 4 separate charts than it would take to generate an individual chart, but if you want to look at all of those 4 pieces of data, this is the fastest way, instead of having to go in and generate one chart and come back and generate a second chart and come back. The last thing I wanted to mention is that I am showing milestones on this particular chart. I'm showing that the student had a behavior plan on, let's say, at the end of June. We revised the behavior plan in the end of August, and it looks like after we revised the behavior plan, the behavior problems dropped significantly. It also shows a speech therapy milestone. Apparently we'd introduced speech therapy, but that doesn't appear to have really had any real significant impact on the student's overall level of behaviors. When you're setting up a chart, you can choose to have any 1, 2, any, all of the milestones plotted on the chart. So you can, that does enable you to see what was the impact of the behavior plan. Well, it seems to have reduced the behaviors, but not as much as we want. Well, what was the effect of the revised behavior plan? Behavior seems to have dropped dramatically. When you're setting up a chart, you'll be taking to a form that looks something like this, which allows you to specify all of the options that you want to set for your individual chart. We tend to set the defaults in DDtrac to be the most common or most popular selections for each one of the chart types, but you can change any of the options. Certainly, quite often people want to change the date range and what objectives they want to work on. But we do try and set up the chart form to minimize the amount of effort you have to generate a chart. So this is a target performance comparison, and you can select the objective that you want to compare the targets for. In this case, this objective has 4 targets, and so I would just check the targets that I want to look at on the chart. It has the start date, and then I can actually look at the change in performance by month, by week, or by day. And what you want to plot it by really will depend on, one, how much data do you have. If you only have data for 4 weeks, you might as well plot it either by week or by day. If you have data for 4 years, then you may want to look at long-term performance over a longer period of time. You can set up a progress goal. In this case, the progress goal is 80% correct. The chart type, there's several different chart types. You've seen that we have line charts. You can have data labels on your line charts. We have the stacked column charts. We also have column charts. And for some of the types of charts you can even generate a pie chart. You're allowed to select whether or not you want to include milestones on charts, and you can even limit it by users to show, maybe you might want to see which users the student has worse behavior problems with. So that's really the end of my formal presentation. I'm going to take questions from the members of the webinar class now, and to everybody else I'm going to sign off and stop recording.